Wasn't just a human in a foreign land, but someone important, someone who mattered. I remember, he said, his voice low. Ilara smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone who had found what they were looking for. It was a smile of someone who was carrying a burden far too heavy to bear alone. Then you know what this means, she said. I need your help. Not just for me, but for my people, for the future of my world. Mark looked into her eyes, and for the first time in years, he saw a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wasn't the life he had imagined, but perhaps it was the life he was meant to lead. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't walk away now. The days following Ilara's arrival were filled with uncertainty and questions. Mark had tried to go back to his normal life, but nothing felt the same. The quiet moments in his apartment now felt louder, as if every small sound reminded him of the past he had left behind. He couldn't stop thinking about Ilara and the request she had made. How could he just ignore it? How could he turn away from her again after all this time? Ilara had told him that things had changed. The people on her planet were no longer living in peace. A faction, led by a powerful group of political leaders, had been planning something dangerous. They wanted to bring about war to save their world. It was a plan that went against everything Ilara believed in, and she knew she couldn't stop it alone. But it wasn't just a political issue. It was personal for her. And now it was personal for Mark too. One evening, as Mark sat at his kitchen table, Ilara arrived again. She looked even more serious than before, her face drawn with worry. There was no sign of the calm, collected woman he had once known. The fear in her eyes was real, and it made Mark uneasy. I'm sorry to keep pulling you into this, Mark, she said, sitting down across from him. But I need you to understand something. Mark nodded, waiting for her to continue. What is it? He asked, his voice quiet but firm. Ilara hesitated for a moment, as if she wasn't sure how to explain what had happened. The situation on my planet is worse than I let on. There are factions among my people who believe that war is the only way to survive. They think that if they can destroy the weaker races, they will secure a future for us. But it's a lie. It's a twisted plan that could lead to the death of millions, and it will tear apart everything we've worked for. Mark's heart sank as he listened. He had never imagined that the peaceful world he had once visited could be torn apart like this. It was hard to grasp the depth of the situation, but he could see in Ilara's eyes that she was telling the truth. Her people were in danger. I don't understand, Mark said, trying to wrap his mind around it. How does this involve me? Why would they want my help? Ilara took a deep breath, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. It's because of us, Mark. The bond we shared, it's not just a memory, it's a connection that runs deeper than either of us realized. My people have always believed that humans are too weak to understand our ways, too insignificant to help us. But our connection proves them wrong. What we shared, it can save us all. But only if we act now. Mark looked at her in confusion. How? Does what we had help with all this? What are you asking me to do? Ilara leaned forward, her voice quiet but urgent. There's an ancient artifact hidden on my planet. It holds the key to stopping the war before it begins, but it's protected by the highest authority in my society. Only someone who is outside of our world, someone with a connection to me, can retrieve it. That's why I need you, Mark. Only you can help me get to it. Mark felt his mind racing. An artifact, hidden away and protected? It sounded impossible. But as Ilara continued to speak, something inside him stirred. He had always known that his life had been different since meeting her. The bond they shared, the memories, they were real and they had a purpose. But this was more than just a mission. It was about saving her people, and perhaps even the entire galaxy. What's the catch? Mark asked, his voice skeptical. If it's so important, why haven't they found it already? Why haven't your people been able to stop this war? Ilara's face tightened with worry. The artifact is hidden in a place that no one has been able to reach for centuries. It's guarded by ancient technology that prevents anyone from getting Close. My people have tried, but they've always failed. The only chance we have is if we can unlock its secrets. And that's where you come in. Mark sat back in his chair, thinking about the situation. He didn't know how he could help. He was just a regular human, but as he looked at Alara, he knew he couldn't turn his back on her. Not again. All right, he said finally, his voice steady. I'll help you. But you have to tell me everything. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Alara nodded, her face softening slightly. Thank you, Mark. You don't know how much this means to me. Mark took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't going to be easy. The stakes were too high and the path ahead was uncertain. But he couldn't let Alara down. Not after everything they had shared. The room fell, silent for a moment as they both stared at each other. The weight of the decision hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. Mark knew that once they began this journey there would be no turning back. They would either succeed or fail, but either way it would change everything. And in that moment Mark made a choice. He would stand by Alara, no matter what it took. He would help her save her people, and perhaps in the process, he would find a way to heal the bond they once shared. Let's do this, Mark said, standing up. Where do we start? Alara smiled, a glimmer of hope shining in her eyes. We start by going to my world. The adventure begins now. The journey to Alara's homeworld wasn't easy. Mark had never been on a spaceship like this before. The sleek, silver vessel hummed with life as it glided through the vast emptiness of space. Inside, it was quiet, almost too quiet, except for the soft sounds of machinery working around them. Alara sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the control panel in front of them. She looked calm, but Mark could tell she was anxious. The weight of the task ahead was pressing down on her. It was hard to imagine what it must have felt like for her, knowing that the future of her entire planet rested on their shoulders. As the ship soared through the stars, Mark couldn't help but think back to the conversations they had shared in the past. The first time they had met felt like a lifetime ago. He remembered the warmth of her smile, the spark in her eyes. Back then, everything had felt so simple. But now, it was different. They weren't just two people from different worlds. They were on a mission that could either save or destroy everything Alara had ever known. We'll be landing soon, Alara said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but Mark could hear the underlying tension in her words. Once we land, we'll have to move quickly. There's no time to waste. Mark nodded, his mind racing. He didn't fully understand what they were looking for, but he trusted Alara. She had been the one to bring him into this world of unknown dangers, and now it was up to him to help her. How are we going to find the artifact? Mark asked, his voice steady. What exactly are we looking for? Alara turned to face him, her eyes thoughtful. The artifact is hidden in a place called the Temple of the Ancients. It's deep in the heart of the Forbidden Jungle, a place that's considered off-limits to my people. Only a few know where it is. The temple itself is protected by ancient defenses, mechanical creatures, traps, and obstacles that no one has been able to get past. That's where you come in. Mark raised an eyebrow. Me? How can I help with that? Alara smiled, faintly. You're human, you think differently. You see things in ways that we don't. You might be able to find a path that no one else can see. Mark didn't feel very special. He was just an ordinary man caught up in an extraordinary situation. But if Alara believed in him, then maybe he had something to offer. The ship began its descent, the planet coming into view through the large windows. It was a beautiful world, lush, green forests stretched as far as the eye could see, with towering mountains in the distance. The atmosphere was thick with moisture and the air smelled fresh, almost sweet. We're almost there, Alara said, her voice soft with a mix of anticipation and worry. Once we land, we'll need to be careful. The jungle is dangerous, even for my people. The ship touched down gently on the surface of the planet, the landing gear settling into the soft, wet ground. Mark and Alara quickly gathered their things and stepped out of the ship. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of the jungle surrounded them, chirping insects, rustling leaves, and the distant call of unseen animals. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. The jungle was alive, but it wasn't the kind of life he was used to. It was wild, untamed, and full of hidden dangers. They had only just begun their journey, and already Mark could feel the weight of the task ahead. "This way," Ilara said, leading him toward a narrow path that seemed to disappear into the dense trees. She moved with purpose, but Mark could see the worry in her eyes. She wasn't just worried about the artifact. She was worried about what might happen if they didn't find it in time. As they moved deeper into the jungle, Mark couldn't help but feel like they were being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he kept glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see something or someone lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing, just the sounds of the jungle. They came to a clearing and Ilara stopped, her eyes scanning the area. "This is it," she said quietly. "The entrance to the Temple of the Ancients is just ahead." Mark looked around. There was nothing but thick vines and ancient trees. It didn't look like anything special, but Ilara seemed certain. She stepped forward, her hand brushing against a large rock that was covered in moss. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to shift, and the rock moved aside, revealing a dark, narrow entrance. Ilara smiled, though there was little joy in her expression. "This is it. The temple is inside." Mark's heart raced as they stepped into the dark passage. It was cold inside, and the air was thick with the smell of age and decay. They had entered a place that had been hidden away for centuries, a place that no one from Ilara's world had dared to enter. As they moved deeper into the temple, the walls seemed to close in around them. The light from their small flashlight flickered against the stone walls, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, but he couldn't explain why. "Stay close," Ilara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to find the artifact before it's too late." Mark nodded, his eyes scanning the shadows around them. They were not alone, and he could feel it. The deeper they went into the Temple of the Ancients, the more Mark could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The air was cold and the walls around them seemed to be closing in, like the temple itself was alive. Every footstep they took echoed off the stone, and Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. The farther they went, the darker it became and the more dangerous the situation seemed. Ilara walked in front of him, her movement steady but cautious. She was determined, but Mark could see the worry in her eyes. This place was not just a relic of the past, it was a test, and the path ahead was filled with traps, challenges, and, most frightening of all, her own people who might not understand why they were here. "We're getting closer," Ilara said, her voice barely a whisper, as if the very walls might hear them. "The artifact is in the heart of the temple, but we must pass through the guardians first." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Guardians? What kind of guardians are we talking about?" Ilara's face darkened. "They are ancient machines created by my ancestors to protect the artifact. They are relentless and will stop at nothing to keep anyone from reaching it. The temple's defenses have been in place for centuries, but we have no choice but to face them." Mark's heart began to race. He wasn't sure what kind of machines she was talking about, but if they were ancient and powerful, they couldn't be good news. Still, he trusted Ilara. She had led him this far, and he wasn't about to back down now. They continued moving deeper into the temple, and soon they reached a large chamber. The walls were covered in strange markings, symbols that Mark couldn't read but felt sure were important. In the center of the room was a massive stone pedestal, upon which rested a glowing object. It was the artifact, the thing that could save Ilara's people. But as soon as Mark stepped forward, he heard a deep mechanical hum, followed by a low rumble. "Get ready," Ilara warned. "They're coming." Suddenly, the stone floor began to shake, and the ground beneath their feet split open. From the dark corners of the room, towering figures began to emerge. These weren't just simple machines. They were massive, humanoid creations, their bodies made of ancient, dark metal. Their eyes glowed with an eerie red light, and they moved, with a speed that seemed unnatural for their size. Mark's breath caught in his throat. These were the guardians Ilara had warned him about. They were like nothing he had ever seen before. Machines designed for one purpose, to protect the artifact. At all costs, Ilara, what do we do? Mark asked, his voice tight with fear. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped forward, holding up her hand as if trying to communicate with the machines. Mark could see that she was trying to speak to them, but the guardians did not listen. They only moved toward them with heavy steps, their metal feet crashing against the stone floor. "Move," Ilara shouted, pushing Mark aside as one of the guardians reached for them. Without thinking, Mark grabbed Ilara's arm and pulled her to the side just in time to avoid the guardian's swipe. The machine's arm slammed into the stone floor, sending cracks through the ground. "Ilara, we can't fight them," Mark said, panic rising in his chest. "What are we supposed to do?" "We don't need to fight them," she replied, her voice steady despite the danger. "We just need to get past them." Mark's mind raced. Get past them? How? They were huge, fast, and clearly designed to stop anyone from getting close to the artifact. But there was no time to think. The guardians were closing in on them, and Mark had to act fast. "Follow me," Ilara commanded, turning and sprinting toward the far side of the chamber. Mark followed her without hesitation, his heart pounding as he ran. Behind them, the guardians moved quickly, their heavy steps shaking the temple with every movement. Mark could hear the screeching of metal as one of the machines tried to reach out and grab them, but Ilara knew the temple better than anyone. She led them to a narrow passageway that Mark hadn't noticed before. It was hidden in the shadows, just behind a large pillar. The guardians seemed to hesitate, but they didn't stop. Mark could feel the pressure building, the sound of the machine's movements growing louder behind them. "Just a little further," Ilara said through gritted teeth, her face tense with focus. They ran faster now, their footsteps echoing in the narrow corridor. Mark's legs were burning, but he pushed through the pain. He had no choice. He had to trust Ilara. She was their only way out. Finally, they reached the end of the passage where a small door stood ajar. Ilara shoved it open with all her strength, and they both tumbled out into the next chamber. The door slammed shut behind them, cutting off the sound of the guardians. Mark took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He had never been so scared in his life. But they were safe, at least for now. "That was too close," Mark said, his voice shaky. Ilara nodded, her face pale but determined. "We're almost there. The artifact is just beyond this door. We can't let them catch us now." Mark looked at the door ahead of them. He knew that they were nearing the end of their journey. The artifact was within their reach, but so were the dangers that came with it. They had made it past the guardians, but they weren't out of danger yet. With one last look at Ilara, Mark stepped forward, ready to face whatever awaited them in the next chamber. Mark's heart raced as they moved through the narrow hallway that led to the final chamber. The air in the temple was thick with tension, and every step they took seemed to echo through the quiet stone walls. He had no idea what they would face next, but something told him this would be the most dangerous part of their journey. Ilara walked beside him, her face a mask of determination. She had been leading them through the temple with confidence, but Mark could see the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She was carrying the burden of her people's future, and in a way, his future too. "This is it," Ilara said, her voice low and steady. "The artifact is in the center of this chamber, but we have to be careful. There's something protecting it. It's not just the guardians we've already faced. There's another test." Mark nodded, feeling a cold sweat on the back of his neck. What could be worse than the guardians? The machines had nearly caught them several times already. He couldn't imagine what other dangers were hidden in this ancient place. They entered the final chamber, and Mark immediately felt the change in the air. It was colder here, almost as if the room was alive, watching them. The chamber was vast, its walls covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. At the center of the room, on a raised stone platform, was the artifact, a beautiful glowing object that pulsed with an otherworldly light. Mark could feel its power from where he stood, Elara stepped forward, her eyes locked on the artifact. "This is what we've come for," she whispered. "But it won't be easy. The final test is one of choice. The artifact will only reveal itself to those who are willing to make the right decision." Mark frowned, unsure of what she meant. "What choice? What do you mean by that?" Elara hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. "The artifact is not just a tool. It's a key. One that can unlock the future of my people. But in order to use it, we have to be willing to sacrifice something. It will ask us to choose between saving my world and saving yourself. The choice will be yours, Mark." Mark's mind spun as he tried to process what she was saying. Sacrifice? What did that mean? He had come this far, risking everything to help Elara, but now he was being asked to make a choice that could change everything. He looked at Elara, his heart heavy with the weight of what she had just said. He didn't want to lose her. He didn't want to let her down. But what if the choice meant giving up something he couldn't live without? "Elara, I don't know what to do," Mark admitted, his voice cracking. "I came here to help, but I never thought it would come to this. What if the cost is too high?" Elara turned to him, her eyes soft with understanding. "I don't know what the future holds either, Mark. But I trust you. You've already shown me that. You're willing to fight for what's right. Whatever the choice is, I believe you will make the right one." Mark swallowed hard, his mind racing with thoughts of his own future, of the life he had left behind on Earth. He had come here to help, but he never imagined it would come to this. Facing a choice between saving the woman he loved and saving himself. How could he make such a decision? Elara's voice broke through his thoughts. "I don't want to pressure you, Mark, but we don't have much time. The longer we wait, the more dangerous this becomes. The factions on my planet are already preparing for war. If we don't act now, everything we've done will be for nothing." Mark looked at the glowing artifact. It seemed to pulse with life, as if calling to him. He could feel its power drawing him in, but he didn't know if he was ready for what it would ask of him. Would he have to choose between his own happiness and the fate of Elara's people? Could he live with that? A voice echoed in the chamber, a voice that seemed to come from the artifact itself. "Choose, human. Will you save your own future, or will you sacrifice everything for the greater good?" Mark's heart pounded as the weight of the decision sank in. He had never been one to make decisions lightly, especially when it involved so much. But as he stood there, facing the artifact and Elara, something inside him clicked. He couldn't just think of himself. He couldn't walk away from this, not when so much was at stake. "I can't walk away, Elara," Mark said, his voice firm. "I've already come too far. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. If I have to sacrifice something, then so be it." Elara's eyes filled with gratitude and sadness at the same time. "Mark, I don't know what this choice will cost you, but I know it's the right one." Mark nodded, his eyes never leaving the artifact. He knew that whatever happened next, it would change everything. But for the first time since he had stepped onto this alien world, he felt certain about one thing. He was ready to face the consequences, whatever they might be. The artifact pulsed brighter, as if acknowledging his decision. Mark took a step forward, Elara by his side. The room seemed to hold its breath as the final test began. Mark stood still, his eyes fixed on the glowing artifact before him. The decision had been made. There was no turning back now. His heart was heavy with the weight of what he had just agreed to. This was more than just a choice between saving Elara's people or his own future. It was a test of who he was, of what kind of man he wanted to be. Beside him, Elara watched with bated breath, her hands clenched at her sides. She had always known that the path ahead would be difficult, but she never expected it to be this hard for Mark. The artifact was powerful, but it came with a price neither of them could fully understand yet. Mark had chosen to sacrifice his own happiness for the greater good, and Elara felt a mix of awe and fear at his decision. "Are you sure about this, Mark?" she asked quietly, her voice soft but full of emotion. Mark didn't take his eyes off the artifact. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he replied. "This is what I have to do." With that, he stepped forward, his fingers brushing the surface of the glowing object. The moment his hand made contact, the room seemed to come alive. A powerful energy surged through the temple, sending a tremor through the walls. Mark felt a sudden warmth spread through him, a connection that was deeper than anything he had ever felt before. The artifact pulsed with a light that filled the entire chamber, bathing them in a soft, otherworldly glow. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The world, the temple, even the air around them. Then slowly, the energy began to shift. The artifact began to transform, its light changing from a soft glow to a brilliant flare of white. It was as if the very core of the temple was waking up, responding to Mark's touch. Ilara stepped back, her eyes wide in awe. It's working," she whispered. But Mark didn't hear her. His mind was elsewhere, consumed by the overwhelming power that flowed through him. It was as if he could feel the pulse of the entire galaxy, the weight of the universe, pressing against his chest. For a moment he felt both insignificant and all-powerful at the same time. The choice had been made, and the artifact had chosen him. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet shifted again and the temple began to tremble. Mark staggered, his vision blurry as the energy around him intensified. Ilara reached out, grabbing his arm to steady him. "What's happening?" she cried, her voice filled with panic. "I don't know," Mark said, his voice strained. "It's like the temple. It's responding to the choice I made. We have to get out of here." Before they could react, the walls of the temple began to crack, the ancient stone splitting apart as though something was forcing its way through. The entire chamber was shaking violently now, and Mark could feel the power of the artifact reaching its peak. This was the moment. It was now or never. "Ilara, we need to move now," Mark shouted, pulling her toward the exit. But the temple wasn't going to let them leave so easily. As they ran, the ground beneath them cracked open, sending debris flying. The walls seemed to close in as if the very structure of the place was collapsing. Mark didn't know how much time they had, but they couldn't afford to waste a second. "Ilara!" Mark called, looking back to make sure she was still with him. She was close behind, her face pale with fear, but her eyes locked on him with a determination he hadn't seen before. Together, they reached the entrance, where the temple's massive stone doors began to open on their own, as if responding to their need for escape. They didn't stop to look back. They couldn't. The temple was collapsing behind them, the walls crumbling into dust as they sprinted toward the ship. The sounds of the destruction were deafening, but they didn't slow down. When they finally reached the ship, Mark was out of breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He turned to see Ilara, her face as weary as his own, but there was a sense of relief in her eyes. They had made it out alive. "Ilara," Mark said, his voice soft with exhaustion. "We did it." She nodded, her expression softening. "Yes, we did, but it's not over yet. The artifact, it's only the beginning. Now we have to make sure it's used wisely, or everything we fought for will be lost." Mark took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had made the choice to sacrifice for her people, and now he understood the true cost of that decision. But as he looked at Ilara, he knew he couldn't have made any other choice. Her people were saved, for now, and the future was uncertain. But they had one another. "We'll figure it out," Mark said, his voice firm with conviction. "We'll find a way to use it. Together." Ilara smiled, a mixture of gratitude and love shining in her eyes. "I never thought I'd find someone like you, Mark. Someone willing to sacrifice everything for the greater good. You've shown me what it means to truly fight for something." Mark smiled back, his heart lighter than it had been since he first set foot on this alien world. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They had each other, and together they would face whatever challenges came next. As the ship lifted off, leaving the crumbling temple behind, Mark looked out at the stars. For the first time in a long while, he felt hope. The future was still uncertain, but it was theirs to shape.